Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alabama yields back. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have been despairing the state of our country, but even more so the state of this committee and the judiciary for the last several months. This committee is becoming the Eileen Cannon Committee, the Trump-anointed group to support him and defend him for conduct that is not defensible and to roadblocks in the path of justice where he should be on trial in Florida for his keeping classified records. He didn't declassify them. He just kept them. This is a man who several of our colleagues went to New York and said that our rule of law was false, that this case in New York was political and shouldn't have taken place. The thing we're most respected for around the world is the rule of law. People envy us for our rule of law. And to have people who know better go and trash it is despicable, almost treasonous. And then this committee, the hypocrisy that this committee would question Merrick Garland, who appointed a Republican to look into President Biden's conduct, a man who Mr. Hurst said, and he was here to be questioned. Anybody here could have questioned him about the conduct of what Mr. Biden said and why he came to that conclusion. But he said he was a sympathetic elderly man with a poor memory. The fact that he was sympathetic is why he would not be convicted, as distinguished from his forthcoming opponent and past opponent, who is a despicable, mendacious man with a poor knowledge of history and government and a poor memory to boot. A man who his own Secretary of State said was a moron. Yes, Tillerson said he was a moron. Kelly said he admires, John Kelly, his chief of staff, said he admires autocrats and dictators and has no conception of the rule of law or concern for it or for democracy in our country. His defense secretary, Mark Esper, said he was a threat to democracy. John Bolton declared him to be unfit to be president. And, of course, Mike Pence said they had profound differences. All folks coming up here and defending what's going on in New York. This is a man who had just his wife gave birth to his child, and he was playing golf and fornicating in Nevada rather than being with his wife and his newborn child. What an example we have for the American public and for young people. Joe Biden is, as Colin Yost said at the correspondence dinner, a decent man. He's sympathetic and a decent man. And the idea, one of the gentlemen said, we're in an impeachment hearing. We're not in an impeachment inquiry. These are just things they've thrown out there to try to take the facts away that he was twice impeached and to try to impeach
Would the gentleman yield?
Biden and Mayorkas. Both were wrong. And the hypocrisy that I think every Republican on this committee voted against holding Barr in contempt, and that one of our members, my friend, the chairman, was cited for contempt because he refused to appear before a committee dealing with January 6th and the overthrow of the government. The hypocrisy is voluminous, and I yield to Mr. Nadler.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I just want to point out that the discussion we heard before about best evidence and so forth between Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Ivey is fit for a criminal trial. But this is not a criminal trial. This is a dispute between the executive branch and Congress. And in such a dispute, Congress must show a need for the evidence that we seek. Republicans have not made that showing. They've shown no need for these files. So the discussion we heard before is irrelevant because it was dealing with a criminal trial. This is not a criminal trial. This is a dispute between the executive branch and Congress. In such a dispute, Congress must show a need for the evidence that they seek. Republicans have not made that showing. They have not shown any need for these files, and that renders this whole thing ridiculous. And I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I yield back to him.
Thank you. In my last 10 seconds, all I can say is God bless America, because we need somebody of that authority to bless us with the way this committee and these folks have dealt with this case and ruining a constitution and democracy.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the discussions drifted into the Manhattan trial, I just have to say that it's ironic to hear my colleague from California speak to the integrity of our legal system. Like most Americans, I am appalled that our justice system could become so dangerously politicized. It started with the IRS harassing members of the Tea Party years ago. Then we had the FBI and intelligence agencies using what they knew was a completely fabricated story by the Clinton campaign over Russian collusion. My colleague played a large role in that and was censured by the House for his role in it. Then we had the intelligence agencies concoct a lie that the Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian hoax, and that may have decisively affected the outcome of the 2020 election. And now we have these sham cases against Donald Trump on the flimsiest of legal grounds that have never been charged before, and with the obvious intent to interfere massively with the presidential campaign. The sinister nature of these cases is that it doesn't matter that they're falling apart. That's not the point. The point is to drain Trump of his time and resources and throw the election to the Democrats. Now, the cornerstone of our justice system is equal justice under law, that no matter who we are, we're treated the same. That's why justice is depicted as blindfolded. And in each of these cases, there seem to be three standards of justice, one for Donald Trump, one for the rest of us, and then one for the Democrats. And that strikes at the heart of the matter before us, the decision to prosecute Donald Trump for mishandling classified documents and the decision not to prosecute Joe Biden for the same offense. Now, executive privilege is an important concept, has an enormous bearing on the separation of powers. The discussion, in fact, it goes back to George Washington's administration. And the discussions that a president has with his advisors or subordinates in the executive branch on any matter within the powers of his office are no more the business of the legislative branch than the discussions among members of Congress are the business of the executive. The president cannot compel Congress to divulge its deliberations any more than Congress can compel the president. So it's crystal clear to me that any official discussion between the president and any subordinate cannot be pierced. But this case is very different because it's not a conversation between the president and a subordinate over policy or the discharge of his official duties. Rather, it's an interview in the course of a criminal investigation. To me, this is far closer to the Nixon tapes. The Nixon tapes were not conversations as part of a criminal investigation, but conversations that had bearing on one. The conversation in this case is even further from the root of the executive privilege. This was an interview in a criminal investigation that clearly falls within the legitimate legislative function. It's not only a legitimate inquiry, it's a vital inquiry. How is it that there are two cases involving the handling of classified information that have been treated so radically differently? As President Donald Trump had absolute authority to declassify material at will, as Vice President, Joe Biden did not. Under the Presidential Records Act, President Trump had absolute discretion to determine what papers to retain in the course of his presidency. As Vice President, Joe Biden did not. And yet a decision was made to prosecute Donald Trump and yet not to prosecute Joe Biden by the Joe Biden administration. So it bears repeating. The foundation of our judicial system is equal justice under law. Without this, the law loses its moral authority. It simply becomes raw political force. And it's apparent to me that we are moving dangerously away from this principle of equal justice. Congress has an essential role to play in setting things right before we lose the very principles that define us as a free people. And central to this is to understand why these two cases were treated so very differently. The request of the administration is legitimate, and the contempt citation for its refusal to provide this information is entirely appropriate. And with that, I yield back.
Well said. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California. I have California, then I'll come there. The gentleman from California, Mr. Lewis, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The House Judiciary Committee is responsible for helping to ensure the rule of law. Unfortunately, the actions of this committee chairman in ignoring a bipartisan congressional subpoena has hurt the ability of this committee to get information and hurt the rule of law. It is a height of hypocrisy for the chairman of this committee to try to enforce a contempt subpoena against Merrick Garland when this chairman himself ignored a bipartisan congressional subpoena. Now, I've been to a number of proceedings in my time in Congress and in the state legislature that have been relatively stupid. But this proceeding goes beyond stupidity. It is a waste of taxpayer resources. Why is that? Because we have the transcript. We have the transcript of the interview between Special Counsel Robert Hur and President Biden. There's no evidence whatsoever that this transcript was made up, that it's fake, that it's been doctored. This transcript was produced by Robert Hur's office. Robert Hur was appointed by Donald Trump. He is a Republican appointee. The notion that somehow this transcript is fake is a wild, insane conspiracy theory. You know what I think is really going on? Joe Biden stutters. He's always had a stuttering problem. He was made fun of as a child because he stuttered. He was bullied as a kid because he stuttered. He overcame stuttering to become president of the United States. And Republicans in the past have used his stuttering to smear him. I think that's what they want to do again with this audio. I think that is despicable. And if Republicans are going to go low, I am going to punch back. So let's talk about Donald Trump. I agree with the Republican from New Jersey who said if a person cannot stand trial, he should not be president of the United States. Donald Trump has fallen asleep multiple times at his own criminal trial. I am a former prosecutor. I can tell you that is not normal. I think there may be some physical and mental health issues that should be investigated. I'm going to tell you what people in the courtroom are writing about Donald Trump falling asleep. Here's a reporter who has been observing this. One reporter observed, quote, that Donald Trump has nodded off a few times, his mouth going slack and his head drooping onto his chest, end quote. Another reporter said, quote, that Donald Trump slowly dropped his head. His eyes closed, it jerked back upward, he adjusts himself, then his head droops again, he straightens up, leaning back, his head droops for a third time, he shakes his shoulders, eyes closed still, his head drops, end quote. If a person is so weak and feeble, if Donald Trump is so weak and feeble, he cannot stay awake at his own criminal trial, he can't be president of the United States. So instead of going around trying to smear different people, why don't we work on a bipartisan basis on issues that matter to the American people? Like, how about let's do a bipartisan hearing and let's do some bills to fix our broken immigration system. But the Republicans here don't want to do that. They don't want to work on a bipartisan basis. They don't want to fix this. Why? Because Donald Trump told them not to. Well, okay, so how about another issue? Let's talk about high prices. Prices are high. We did get a good report yesterday that inflation has now slowed down. That is good, but prices are still high. Why don't we work on bipartisan basis to look at price gouging? We have companies making record profits. They're gouging consumers. Let's have a hearing on that. Why don't we have a hearing on that? Because Republicans don't want to fix this issue. They want it as a campaign issue. Okay, then how about let's do a topic that isn't a campaign issue. Artificial intelligence has now become prevalent in many places. It could have privacy implications. It could do amazing things. It could also harm us in a variety of ways in terms of bias and so on. Why don't we do a hearing on this in this committee? Why don't we do that? Instead, we're here doing this stupid stuff to try to get audio of a transcript we already have. And it gets even worse than that. There is a second committee. The Oversight Committee is going to do an exact same hearing on this contempt proceeding. Let me just put in that, you know what, at least the chairman of that committee did not ignore a congressional bipartisan subpoena. It might be more appropriate for that committee to do it, and we should end this proceeding right now. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from